himself for his opening statement. We're certainly pleased to hold this hearing to examine the Foreign Account Tax Compliance Act, or also known as FATCA. FATCA requires foreign financial institutions to investigate their own accounts for suspected ties to the United States. Hear that again. Investigate their own accounts for suspected ties to the United States, and then report those accounts to the IRS for further investigation. Now, that doesn't sound crazy in its face, but as it turns out, FATCA is a failure at a number of different levels. By its drafters' own estimate, of whom we're going to hear expert testimony today, and certainly the work that has been done in some of those investigative modes is to be applauded. I've looked at the record, and so I look forward to seeing that. But even by those own estimates of the drafters, it was seeking to reduce tax evasion overseas, and it only does that by less than 1%. The senator mentioned this, so less than $1 billion out of an estimated $100 billion in lost revenue overseas. Commissioner Koskinen, who has testified before this committee a number of times, has given sworn testimony regarding the high rate of return on investment for spending on the IRS with normal enforcement activities. In fact, his public statements indicate a return of up to $20 for every $1 that is invested on enforcement. So a $20 return in revenue for $1 invested in enforcement. By contrast, FATCA brings in well under, by any estimations, half of that amount on a per dollar basis that is invested. So the IRS has asked for about $200 million to implement FATCA in the FY 2017 budget. So by the commissioner's own estimates, not by mine, not by any think tank, by the commissioner's own estimates of enforcement returns, just shifting the money from FATCA to the general enforcement areas would increase our tax revenues by over $1 billion. And so if we're looking at proper allocation, now this is without spending one more penny on the overall budget for the IRS, it's just shifting it. And so when we look at that, that's a significant return. FATCA also unfairly and unilaterally burdens our biggest trading partners and strongest allies. I found out about this really by some of the people that we'll hear from today when I was in Israel, and with some of the issue that they started referring to this thing called FATCA that I had no idea what it was. And so, as a good politician, I was saying, well, I'll get back to you on that. And so I went very quickly and Googled it to figure out exactly what we were talking about. And so as I look at this, we are looking at unbelievable implications here. When we look at the compliance costs on foreign banks and international, on the international economy, we're looking at up of $200 million per bank to comply, and potentially hundreds of billions of dollars overall. Other countries are understandably upset that we're hurting their economies, and are doubly upset that we have not yet offered them access to our own taxpayer data. So we basically said, you have to comply, and there was this reciprocal agreement, and we've said, well, you have to comply, but we're not going to comply. It was a double standard that we see. And so many of the foreign financial institutions have tried to avoid these FATCA compliance costs by refusing to take U.S. citizens. That's what highlighted it for me. And I said, you've got to be kidding me. They're saying, well, if you're a U.S. citizen, they don't want to touch you in some of these foreign financial institutions just because of the compliance costs. So expatriates have had to make the tragic choice between keeping their citizenship and preserving their financial stability. And to illustrate that point, I want to share a video that has been shared with the subcommittee to this committee. And so if we'd pause and maybe take a look at this video. It's approximately 3 minutes in length.
I'm Donna Lane Nelson. I come from proud New England Yankee stock, In fact, my ancestors came over on the Blessing in 1635 to the Massachusetts Bay Colony. I've been a lifelong Democrat and an activist. I've often written Congress or called Congress members on issues I care about, and I have always voted. My career was working with credit unions, often helping middle class and lower class people with their finances. Because of FATCA, I am no longer a U.S. citizen. I had to choose between a normal financial life in Switzerland and my birth country. That decision was so painful that after I renounced, I vomited. It still hurts today. I've always paid my U.S. taxes, and in many ways, I was double taxed. I needed a specialized accountant to keep me in compliance, even though my income was low. It cost me about $1,200 a year to pay about $700 in taxes, which does show my income was limited. After FATCA was passed, my Swiss bank called me in. In the meeting, they told me if I did anything wrong, my account would be closed and I could not get another. The reason? I was American. About the same time, I began my first of 2 battles with breast cancer. It was a very difficult period. I started to research FATCA and its implications. At that point, many American expats were talking about being denied financial services, as well as having job problems because of FATCA. I realized if I wanted to continue living in Switzerland, I would have to renounce my U.S. citizenship. Once inside the embassy, a woman explained to me that I could never, ever get my passport back. I was shaking. Would I be able to visit my daughter and my beloved stepmother in the States? I was crying. I took the oath, separating me from my birth country. As I walked back toward the bakery, I threw up. On behalf of myself and millions of Americans living overseas, please, please, please repeal FATCA.
Donna is not alone. FATCA has led to a number of U.S. expatriates renouncing their citizenship. And so hopefully today we'll hear from some of our witnesses on how we can address this particular issue in a meaningful way and hopefully return the accountability that we're all for to the proper balance of protecting our personal Fourth Amendment rights and yet still making sure that we hold our government accountable. And with that, I'd like to recognize the ranking